let's talk about an 1874 capsule wardrobe. Good day and welcome. My name is Caitlin, and here on this channel I teach old-fashioned sewing skills and make reproduction clothing primarily for the 19th and 20th centuries. And this is Lady, who likes to come when I start talking to the camera. If you're a regular viewer, thank you so much for joining me again for another video. I really appreciate y'all coming back to watch. And if you're brand new here, hi, welcome. Again, I'm Caitlin, and if anything such as historical clothing, costuming, reproduction clothing, examining original garments, copying original garments, building wardrobes, you might consider subscribing because we do a lot of that around here, especially the sewing portion of it. I am a professional seamstress. I've been sewing for over 20 years, and I do own a business where I make historical clothing for state sites and living history museums, volunteers, reenactors, living historians, that sort of thing. I used to work in museums. I don't currently, but my husband is a curator, and I do keep a small collection of original garments. And I have wonderful friends who share their vast collections with me. So I'm able to study the original garments and copy them exactly when I'm doing my own sewing, which I then teach you. So I want to do something a little bit different today. Usually we're actually doing a sewing video. But I've been giving a lot of thought to my historic wardrobe and pieces that I may be missing that I need to fill in gaps. But I was having a hard time visualizing for all the different time periods. So for reference, I mostly do 1830 to... It's been 1985 lately, all that whole time frame, and then we skip over and we do World War I, 1930s, and then World War II. We've also dabbled in Regency, but I don't do a lot of Regency. But I know that within all of that, I have gaps in my wardrobe. I have a very hard time visualizing it. And I've been watching some YouTubers who've been doing capsule wardrobes. So for those of you who don't know, capsule wardrobe is where you create a whole wardrobe out of a few pieces and you're able to make different outfits with different accessories to kind of streamline your wardrobe. You don't have that many pieces, but you have a wide variety of outfits that you can put together. And that intrigued me in the terms of trying to save on storage space in the house. And I thought people were putting on YouTube their capsule wardrobes. Maybe someone would be interested in a historic capsule wardrobe and seeing like what a wardrobe would be like in the 1800s. I've also been doing a lot of research into how much clothing the average woman actually owned in the 19th century. And I do have a myth-busting video that came out earlier this month that dealt with one of the myths was, the myth of women only owning 2 or 3 dresses, which we thoroughly debunked, and we'll have more evidence for that in this video. But I've been really looking into how much clothing women actually owned and wore in the 19th century. They weren't really into capsule wardrobes, but me as a living historian, I need to kind of streamline a few things, so we're going to kind of talk about that today and build a wardrobe. I'm saying 1874 really is going to work for about 1870 to 1876. Really 1872 to 1876. I could probably push it to 1870 if I needed to. But 1874 was a nice, middle number between that date range. So we're going to call it the 1874 capsule wardrobe. So obviously I do not live in the 19th century. I don't work in a living history site full-time. I just volunteer a couple times a month, and those are all different time periods. So I in no way need to own as many clothes as a 19th century woman would for a particular time frame. Now, I probably have as much, if not more, clothing articles than the average woman would have, but that's because I do a very long time frame, and that's a lot of clothes that change very frequently. So I need a functioning wardrobe as opposed to actually a historically accurate one. They're historically accurate in their design and make and sewing techniques, but not so much in the actual amount of clothing that I own. So I was going to sit down and make a spreadsheet for myself and color code everything because that's what I do. And I did that, so I'll share that with you at the end. But I kind of want to just talk about the wardrobe and all the pieces that can be used for an 1870s wardrobe. So for 1874, I mostly do working class. I have 2 events coming up later this year that are tentative. We may be going to them, we may not. One's in June, one's in September. The one in June is in Montana. I live in Texas. That's a long way, but a dear friend's putting it on, and we want to, my husband and I want to do it. So if that's in the cards, we want to be able to do that one. The one in September is probably, because it's here in Texas, it's just 4 hours west. Where we used to live. And so that's kind of what spearheaded this whole starting with the 1870s is I really don't, I've done 1870s but never as an actual event. So I have a site that I volunteer at in Austin, Pioneer Farms, and I teach classes for them. So I teach basically most of their cooking classes. So I teach all the cooking classes on hearths and stoves. I teach their cheese making class. I teach soap making because that involves heat. If it involves a fire and it's not blacksmithing, I probably teach that class. I teach the natural dyeing class. If you're ever in Austin, Texas on usually it's the first Saturday of a month, I'm probably teaching a class. If you email me and say, hey, I'm in the area and I'd like to take one of your classes, I can give you a list in the schedule that I'm actually teaching them if you're in the area and that's something you're interested in. And so the house I typically teach in is interpreted as 1870s. It's mid-1870s, and it's a log cabin originally built in the 50s, and it was added on to in the 60s and added on to again. It's interpreted as 1870s. So I have my 1870s dresses that I wear in that, but I only ever do that for a day. It's a couple of hours. I'm teaching a class at historic clothing in a historic site, and then I go home. I don't actually have to have a whole wardrobe in the sense of most events that I attend are Friday through Sunday, so it's a 3-day event. And so I never had to really have a nightgown. I didn't really have to have extra changes of underwear and all those things that kind of come with having a wardrobe. So at these 2 tentative events that are going to be 3 to 4 days a piece, I need to really take a critical look at my wardrobe and see what pieces I will need in the next coming months. All that to say, that's how we got here. Also, I talk a lot with my hands. If you notice, they're highly stained. We are in dewberry season here in Central Texas, and so I just spent the last hour and a half picking berries, and I got like 1.5 gallons of berries we're gonna can and make a cobbler with. So my hands look like I have been attacked by a cat because dewberries are brambles. And then I did wash my hands, but they're all purple. So if you see purple when I'm moving my hands around, it's nothing weird. It's berry juice. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and discuss an 1874 wardrobe for the working class. We're going to start at the bottom, footwear. Finding good period footwear is a problem in any time period. I struggle especially because I walk on the outsides of my feet. And so the outsides of my shoes wear out extremely quickly. And so I have a hard time spending $200+ on period footwear that's only going to last me a few wears because I walk weird. I am working on making my own shoes. It's something I've made little toddler shoes before, but I've made slippers for myself. I'm working on making actual shoes, but I don't know if that's going to be really cost effective in terms of time. It is going to save us money, but it takes a lot of time, and I don't know if that's worth it so much, but it is something I'm working on. I have good 1870s evening shoes, but that's not going to be helpful for working class whatsoever. I have my American Duchess Renoirs, which would work. However, they don't seem to be made for outdoor labor. American Duchess seems to make their shoes a little bit more for inside photo shoots and like light walking. Probably not for bending over fires, chasing small children and doing like labor work. So I don't know if that's going to be the best option for me either, although I do have them and will probably end up wearing them. I have a modern pair of 20th century reproduction shoes that are supposed to be my 1920 shoes, but they look strangely like some 1870s advertisements I've seen. But they also have heels, and so I don't really see them working for working class either. So I don't know how to think about them for working class. I need to do a little bit more research to see if the heels are on all shoes or if it's just like the fashionable shoes. I have a feeling it's on all shoes, in which case I'm going to have to learn how to walk in heels better. My other options would be my Fuguwe Victorias, which are earlier. They do not have a heel, and they are very much 1850s. I cannot get away with them in 1870s. And I do have American Dry Goods side lacers, but I've not seen side lacers in the 1870s either. So I think the Renoirs or possibly the Repros, the 1920s, but weirdly look like 1870s shoes, might be my best options. But if anyone knows a source for good, cheap, because I can't pay hundreds of dollars on shoes that I'm going to wear out very quickly, 1870s style working boots for women, love to hear it because I need some. Moving on, stockings are super easy. They don't change much within the time frame that I do, so I'll just wear my normal stockings. White would be most common, which is easier to launder and it's easier to keep it looking fresh. And I have at least 4 pairs of white cotton stockings, so we should be good. Now in the period, since we're going to talk about my wardrobe, let's go ahead and talk about what a period woman would likely own. So for working class, the bare minimum that's usually discussed is you would have a dozen stockings. So the Young Ladies Journal in 1867 answered a correspondent who was asking what should be in a young lady's trousseau or what she brings into a marriage as far as her clothing goes. And it lists out what you should bring and includes a dozen stockings. And that would have been considered a bare minimum, considering, at least based on my research, because I've seen some trousseau lists and other lists that have vast quantities of clothing, much more than we would think. But a dozen seems to be like the bare minimum you can get away with. Honestly, I probably actually have at least a dozen stockings between all the ones that I own that are 19th century appropriate. So I kind of do actually have the 19th century, at least the bare minimum of what a 19th century woman would own. As far as wealthy women, so what a wealthy woman would have in her trousseau, the Ladies Magazine and Museum of 1837 states that there's a particular lady they're talking about her trousseau, and it's an extremely wealthy woman. And it stated that the lady was bringing into her marriage 8 dozen cotton stockings and 2 dozen silk stockings, so that's 120 pairs of socks. Personally, I do have 3 pair of wool stockings, 4 pair of silk stockings, and at least 7 pairs of cotton stockings. And 2 of those are colored pairs, 2 of those are striped, which are really 1850s, because that's when striped stockings were common. And then the rest of them I think are white. So stockings are covered. Garters. Garters are needed, and it's something that irks me because a lot of people who costume or do living history often forget about them, because even our reproduction stockings have elastic in them and you don't technically need the garters, but it's something that would have been needed back in the day. So it's actually a needed piece of clothing if you're going to do like true living history. For 1870s, I'm going to use my 1860s garters because this is a style that I have seen all the way up through the 1890s, although they get a little bit more decorative as you go further on. So mine are very plain, which would be normal for the 1860s. For working class 1870s, I think I can still get away with the plain ones. So basically it's just elastic, decorative elastics, not plain white elastic. They're decorative elastic. I have one that has little diamonds in it, and then the rest of them I think are striped, and they have a little clasp, and so I can put them under, right below my knee. Stockings, given garters, based on period paintings and photographs, garters can be worn above or below the knee. It seems to be personal preference. Mine work better below the knee, and they hold my stockings up, but they don't if I put it above the knee, so below the knee it is. I have several pair. I'll probably bring 2 to each event because I have a reputation as a loose woman within Texas living history because I cannot keep my garters on. Seriously, y'all, it's bad. All the men know that if they find a garter on the ground to bring it to me because it's Caitlin's, and then I get incessantly teased about them finding my garter. And sometimes I get told things like, "You left this in my cabin." Like, oh, thank you for returning that. Been looking for it. I have gotten a lot better about not losing them in the last year or so. So much so that the men are kind of getting bored with the fact that I've gotten better about not losing them. So it's been known that they've taken ribbons and pretended they're my garters to make fun of me, to tease me about. And yeah, so I just have a reputation. It's a problem. I know it's hard to believe that little sweet, chaste, innocent little me has a reputation for being a loose woman. But apparently losing your garters is a great way to earn a reputation. Let's move straight on to underclothes, starting with body linen. Body linen is clothing that goes against your body. Believe it or not, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So this would include things like chemises, drawers, and night dresses. So from my research, the average woman is going to own from 8 to about a dozen chemises, if not more. So 8 seems to be the lowest amount that you typically get away with, all the way up to several dozen, of course. And this makes sense because you wear these things out more often. Typically, you wear your body linen for a day, so your chemise and your drawers and that sort of thing. And then it is put away to be washed before it is worn again because it has all the body oils. Your sweat is usually nasty and gross, especially if it's summer. And typically, women did laundry once a week in the 19th century. So that means you would have, if you had 8 chemises, you would have 1 for each day of the week, plus a spare in case something happened, also for, wash day. So that's very similar to how we wear underwear today. It gets worn for a day, and then it gets washed, and if something happens, and you need to change throughout the day, you can change your underwear. They would do the same with chemises and drawers. Now, because I don't live in the 19th century, I don't need a dozen chemises. I do try to ascribe to the period method of 1 a day plus a spare. Because I typically attend 3-day events, that means I usually own for each time period 4 sets of chemises and drawers. I thought I was hearing a bee buzz in the house. It's the cat snoring on the couch. So I did just make 2 1870 chemises. They have like little buttons on the shoulders, and I did draft those myself. I also had 2 pairs of combinations, which is like chemise and drawers combined, and I hate them because I hate drawers, but they are there. One does need to be mended because there's a big rip at one of the legs. I also have another chemise that is barely holding together, but is an 1870 style as well. I have a single pair of 1870s drawers that I'm 95% sure do not fit currently. So, although I hate to say it, looks like I'm going to have to make some 1870s drawers, although I hate wearing them so much. They would be very common by 1870s, so I think I'm going to have to do it. For night dresses, in the summer, I'm a fan of just putting on a fresh chemise to bed, and then I just wear that one the next day. And that works for me. That usually is really nice because they're short sleeves, they have an open neck, so in summer when there's no AC, that's a very nice thing to sleep in. I do have a regular cotton 1860s night dress and a Canton flannel 1860s night dress. And the only really difference between 1870s and 1860s night dresses is that the 1870s have a little ruffle that goes up the neck, and the 1860s collars kind of lay flat. But it's all fit by binding, so I know I can take that binding out, take that collar, flip it the other direction, cut the binding back on to make the ruffle stand up, and that would basically make an 1870 chemise. And so what I can do is have that one cotton nightgown that has a bunch of tucks on it, and I can make it into an 1870s nightgown, but if I ever need to, when I need to change it back to an 1860s nightgown, I can do that. And so theoretically I could have one nightgown for both time periods, and then if I start doing more 1870s events where I actually can justify designating an 1870s nightgown, then we'll make a separate 1870s nightgown. But for the time being, that will work. Next to underwear would be a corset. I have an 1870s linen corset, which would be perfect. It needs a little bit of mending. There's some bones sticking out, but that's very easily done. I've actually been considering making myself a good mid 1860s style with like those huge hip gores. I really like that style. They're used up into the early 1870s. There's an 1879 book that calls that particular style a common cheap corset. So I think for working class, that would actually be a really good style for the beginning of the 1870s. But I haven't had the opportunity to make that up yet. My other one's perfectly serviceable, so for right now, that's gonna be my corset. I could wear a corset cover. They're not universal in the 1870s, but I could wear one. I don't think I will for working class, unless it's needed for like a sheer dress, which I don't have one, so I don't think I'll actually need one. If I end up needing one, I have 4 1860s corset covers that I don't wear. So I'll just take one of them apart, recut it to an 1870s bodice shape, which really is just moving the arm size up a little bit, and then having that as my corset cover. For petticoats, my usual ones will be perfectly fine. I have a vast quantity of basic under petticoats. Some of them are completely hand stitched for like earlier 1830s, 1840s, and then some of them are machine stitched for 1850s and later. My normal ones will be just fine. I have a flannel one for cold weather. I have basic white ones that'll be perfectly fine. For skirt supports, a good working class 1870s skirt support, I have a, I don't want to say tuft, it's a stuffed bustle, and it has 3 little layers. It's like a little pillow, and I made that on the channel. So that'd be a great thing. It just ties over, actually it buckles in the front. So that'll be my skirt support for working class. That'll work perfectly fine. For a petticoat to go over the skirt support, so my underskirt, I have 2 options. I have my white cotton one, which has a bunch of Van Dyke trim. It's very pretty and fancy. Really great, nice petticoat. And then for working wear, I have a wool petticoat that is made from an older skirt. It is a little too long still for a petticoat. I need to cut off about 2 or 3 inches at the hem, but that's pretty easily done. Moving on to dresses. So I have a decent quantity of 1870s dresses for working class. And again, the old adage of women only own 2 to 3 dresses back then needs to die. Not true. I have 4 right now, which is not anywhere near what the average woman was owning, even working class women. But for someone who doesn't live in the 19th century and only is there for a day or 2 or 3 days, 4 dresses works perfectly fine for me. So I have one worn cotton print that has a couple of mins in it that'd be really good for like really working class, over a fire. Something I don't mind that if it gets completely ruined or I burn or, I get cinders and start smoking, or if it gets run over. I don't mind whatever happens to it because it's worn, it's a little bit faded, and there's already rips and holes in it that I've mended. I also have a nicer 1870s cotton shirting. It's a red plaid, and it's also the same style, it's the same pattern as the other one. It's just made up a little bit nicer fabric. It looks nicer. I can wear that working class just fine. I also have, out of the same fabric, cut out an overskirt to go with it. So I can make up the overskirt, put that on, have a nice little belt, fancy bonnet, parasol, and have a really nice going to town dress that's a little bit sheer. It's a really thin, nice fabric that's really cool. But it can also substitute as a working garment as well. So that'll be a dual purpose gown. So that's a really good one. I have another very nice cotton print that actually looks like it's a cotton silk blend. It is fully cotton, I know that, but it feels and it shines a little bit like a cotton silk blend, so it's a really nice fabric. It would be considered a poor quality silk in the period, but it'd be great for like a working class best dress. And it's a blue stripe. I made that years and years ago. It has, V-neck, and there's velvet down the front, and it has the, I want to call them revolutionary sleeves, but the tight sleeves with a little bell that was very common in the American Revolution with the 1870s because it was 100 years. They revived a lot of those fashions, and the sleeves were one of them. And there's lace under sleeves, and so that's going to be my best dress. I do need to double check that still fits because I'm not entirely sure that it does. I've also been wearing a fichu as the neck filler because it's kind of a lower cut V-neck for day wear, but I'm thinking I might need to invest in a collar, into making a collar, and possibly a chemisette to kind of give it a different look. My final dress is a very light dress weight wool. It's in gray. I have it trimmed in green velvet ribbon. It's a great fall and winter dress. I don't know if I'll be wearing it this summer, but maybe for the September event. It's another one with a removable overskirt that can be dressed up in different ways. I really don't have any like hard labor type dresses for winter of 1870s, but I haven't needed one yet, so I'm going to kind of leave that to the wayside. I also don't have any true silk dresses for this time period. For working class, you could still own silk dresses, especially if they were bought secondhand, but I haven't personally needed one yet, so I haven't made one up. But yes, even working and middle class women could own silk dresses. Again, especially if they were bought secondhand, because that's totally a thing. So in 1869, there was a first lieutenant in Fort Clark, Texas, and his name was Frank P. Gross. He had a wife and a young daughter. And so they were stationed at Fort Clark in Texas, and in 1879, his quarters burned along with all of their belongings. And so they petitioned to the United States government saying, hey, this fire wasn't our fault, and they listed out all the things that they could remember that they lost in the fire. They specifically said there are other things that we can't recall, and the amount of things that they listed amounted to a little over $2,000 that they lost, just in material goods. And again, they said there's a lot more that we can't remember, but you could easily add $500 to this, and it would barely cover what we lost. In the early 1880s, because yes, it took the government that long to get back to them, they finally had done their inquiry, realized that the fire was not their fault, and that they were going to be reimbursed that $2,000. But lucky for us, they listed out every single thing that they could remember, including all of his wife's dresses. So the wife had a total of 13 dresses that were lost, as well as a riding habit, and 2 wrappers. 3 of her dresses were silk. Now a first lieutenant in the 1860s, the later 1860s, were making $600 a year. They're one of the lower ranking commissioned officers, so they're not super well off. They're a little bit more middle class. They're not considered very wealthy, and they're not like at the same stage like a general's wife would be. But she was still owning silk dresses, and she was wearing them out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, because she owned them. So in case anyone wanted to know the full list of Mrs. Gross's articles that she owned, I'm going to list them here, because we're already talking about wardrobe, so why not? Best thing is they listed the amount that each garment was worth, which makes me so happy. So she had a green silk dress that was worth $75. That was her most expensive dress. There's an India silk dress worth $35. So India silk is considered a very cheap silk in the time period, and you see that reflected in the price. It's half the cost of the other silk dress. There's a black and white silk dress that's worth $45. There's a silver gray dress. The fiber content is not specified on that one, but it's listed with all of her wool dresses, so I'm gonna just go on a limb and say it's wool. That one was $60. There's a bombazine dress. Bombazine is a fiber that is wool, sometimes blended with silk, and it has like a raised, like almost a ribbing technique on it. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's a fiber technique that was very common in the 19th century. That one was worth $65. She has one alpaca dress, which is a type of wool just made from alpaca, is worth $40. There's an empress cloth dress, $60. Empress cloth is a version of wool that was very common in the late 1860s and early 1870s. I see it mentioned all over the place. I haven't been able to find a good definition, but I also haven't looked, and I have books on that. I just had to find them. She has a waterproof dress worth $25. One black silk wrapper that's worth $30. A plaid flannel wrapper worth $20. A riding habit, $40. Two muslin dresses, one that's worth $10 and one that is worth $20. One linen lawn dress, worth $10. And two calico dresses, one's worth $4, one's worth $8. So you can see there's a definite price difference between the silk dresses. Like her most expensive one was $75, least expensive was $35, and her calico dresses, which are $4 and $8. Now, when you think about that, you also have to think about silk is lasting a whole lot longer than cotton. And also, you don't put fancy trims on cotton wash dresses to calico dresses. Those are usually either left plain or they're trimmed with silk fabric. They're not trimmed with the velvets and the fringe, the ribbons and the fringe and all that. The silks could be. So when you're thinking about a whole dress, you also have to take into account of what the expensive trims are on those dresses. She could have had one of those dresses trimmed with lace, which would be very expensive, as opposed to the cotton dress. So it's not just the fabric and what that's worth, it's also what trims are on that dress as well. It's making it more valuable. And for those interested, since we also talked about underpinnings earlier, Mrs. Gross lost 6 linen and 10 cotton chemises, so she had 16 chemises, 8 cotton nightgowns, 6 linen and 8 cotton drawers, 2 dressing sacks, which are kind of like very short dressing gowns. She lost a corset, 2 corset covers, 4 pairs of aisle thread stocking, which is a type of very thin, fine cotton thread stocking. She also had 10 pair of another type of cotton stockings. She has 2 pairs of silk stockings, 1.5 dozen collars, 1 dozen pairs of cuffs, 1 point lace collar, 1 pair of lace undersleeves with a matching collar, and 18 handkerchiefs, as well as 2 pairs of shoes, a set of jet jewelry, a pair of cameo earrings, and a pair of coral earrings. Now, some of the other women at that fort did say Mrs. Gross was very well supplied in clothing, because she owns even more than Carrie Williams in 1858 that we discussed in the myth busting video, and she had 10 outfits. Well, 3 of those were wrappers, 6 or 7 dresses is what she had. But that does give us a great list of what a lower ranking officer's wife could afford. So yes, my 4 dresses are on the very low end of what a woman would have owned, but for someone who only does like 3-day events, 4 dresses is more than enough. One thing I do not currently have that I find indispensable on a weekend trip is a wrapper. I have a late 1860s wrapper that I've been using for early 1870s, but it's time to kind of get rid of that one, use that one only for late 60s, which is what it's supposed to be, and actually make myself an 1870s wrapper. I'm going to use Marna Davis's Flora pattern, and I do have fabric set aside for it. And honestly, Flora is going to make an awesome maternity dress when the time comes. Like, I'm looking at that thing going, oh yeah, like it's a sack front, so it's completely not fitted at the front, which means you have room to grow here, and then you can also belt it to make it like a nicer dress, or you can wear an apron over it. So it's basically like a sack and petticoat from the 1850s and 60s, but it's in wrapper form and it has this like big wrapper. It's going to be really nice. It's going to work great as a maternity dress. It's also going to be a great working class dress and wrapper. So looking forward to making that. For accessories, I do keep a plaid pinner apron that I made on an original 1870 sewing machine. It has quite a few burn holes, which half of them need to be patched. And only half of them are patched because the first time I wore that apron, I went to go cooking at Fort McCavitt, and I managed to lean over on some embers and I burned holes through my apron. So I fixed them up, got them all nice and mended, and a couple months later I took them to another event to cook again. And I have never burned any other clothes cooking, ever. But the second time I wore this apron, which is also the last time I wore this apron, I burned new holes in it by leaning over some embers again, by leaning over more embers. So I don't know if the apron is cursed or how that works, but only half the burn, but I've not mended those burn holes. So that is going to need to be done, and I probably shouldn't cook in that apron any longer. I have a printed half apron that I made on an original 1870 sewing machine. And then I also have a white pinner apron that I made for 1860s, but it's still perfectly acceptable for 1870s. It is stained, and I need to figure out how to get those stains out to make it look nice and neat, but it'd be a great service apron. I have kerchiefs to keep my neckline free from sweat and grime. I only have 2 of them. I keep losing them. I'm thinking I should probably make myself 2 more. And then something I might consider is Marna actually sells reproduction 1870s safety pins. And I could technically use safety pins to put on my pinner apron as opposed to straight pins, which is what I usually do and what's period correct for earlier decades. So that's something I might consider, and that would be very convenient to have. If I needed to dress up, say for church, visiting, going into town, running errands, or anything I might need to not wear a like really working class dress, again, I have the wool dress, I have the red one if I wore the overskirt and dressed it up, and then I have the blue striped fancier cotton dress. But I do have several belts I could decorate those with. I have several belt buckles. I have 2 that are reproduction from Beth Miller Hall that are gutta percha. I have 3 that are metal. I have endless amounts of Petersham ribbon and velvet ribbon that are belts that I can use for belting. And I can mix and match all the colors to give me different looks, because accessories are where it's at with capsule wardrobes. So if you change the accessories, you can change the entire look of a dress. I keep a couple pairs of vintage kid gloves I can wear. I have a gray pair and I have a black pair that work for 1870s, so that's covered. For jewelry, I have a few pair of 1860s Beth Miller Hall reproductions that I could swing to 1870, especially the little, I have little acorn ones, some ivory ones, and then some black ones that would work just fine. And I have several brooches that I can swing to 1870. I also have a pair of teardrop coral earrings from Beth that, since Mrs. Gross mentioned that she lost her coral earrings, I think those would be perfectly appropriate. And then if needed, I do have a set of cameo earrings that are period cameos gifted to me by my mother-in-law that I can put, I don't think they have a period hook on them, so I do have some period ones. I could change out the fittings and make them a little bit more period appropriate, but those would be really nice dress up earrings. And Mrs. Gross's jet jewelry set reminded me I actually do have an original jet watch pocket that would be great. And I have an original watch, and then I have a couple of reproduction watches, and all of that would be perfectly appropriate for, and that would be great for the nice outfits. Which reminds me, all of my nice outfits, so the wool, the blue stripe, and the red plaid, I need to put watch pockets into those. I have an original 1870s silk bodice in that room over there that has a watch pocket, and I need to copy that on my dresses so I can start putting my watches into pockets. I also need a parasol. I have probably a few originals in the boxes of parasols, so I own over 50 original parasols. I know I have at least one that's 1870s. That will need to be recovered, and I probably have good silk I could use already in that room, so we'll recover a parasol. And moving on to outerwear, I probably won't need any cold weather event for either 1870s event this year. But for the sake of being thorough, I do have at least 4 wool shawls that would be perfectly appropriate. I have a late 1860s fur collar and muff set that would be great. My 1860s Sontag, which is like a little, it's like a fitted shawl. Ooh, and I also have an 1864 pattern of a crochet jacket that would be perfectly fine. I think the shoulders being further down would probably be a little bit wrong for 1870s, but the sleeve shape is right, and so I think I could swing it for the time being until I make a new one. If I ever do an 1870s winter event, I'm going to need things like a jacket, a mantle, a wool hood, and other winter accessories. That's just not a priority right now. I live in Texas where it doesn't often get cold, so my living history wardrobe all across the board is severely lacking on wintry goods. For headwear, I have options as well. I have a blue plaid sunbonnet. It's a slat bonnet that is an 1870s pattern. I have an 1870s black velvet, nice fashion bonnet that would be really wonderful for winter. In velvet, you don't see that so much mentioned in the summer or the early fall. So I probably will need another fashionable bonnet just for visiting in church and that sort of thing. So I have plenty of extra millinery supplies. I have plenty of extra straw braiding, so I will likely make myself a new bonnet. The other option is I could make a nicer sunbonnet out of a sheer or a semi-sheer very nice cotton, which would be like a dressy sunbonnet, and that would work as well. I might end up doing both. We'll see when the time comes, like what I really want to do. If I run out of time before an event and I don't have everything done, I'll go with nice sunbonnet because then I wouldn't need a parasol. If I have time, I can work on both the bonnet, a nice straw bonnet and a parasol. But a fashion bonnet's going to need a parasol, a sunbonnet does not. So as far as outfits go, I have my pink plaid wash dress that can be paired with any of the 3 aprons and a sunbonnet, but not a lot of options for going, fancier because it's really a ratty dress at this point. The red plaid shirting could be paired with an apron and the sunbonnet for working class. It could be dressed up with the belt and the overskirt and nice jewelry, nicer bonnet, and I could go visiting or church or whatever. Same thing with the wool, although I couldn't fully pull that to working class because of the velvet trim. The fancy cotton stripe, the blue one, could be paired with like a nice lace collar or chemisette. You have jewelry, fashionable bonnet, or fancy sunbonnet. But I probably could swing that wool for a fancier work dress if I was just doing things like serving, like a house servant's job. I could probably swing that wool dress because it looks decent enough. I put a nice white crisp apron on it. I think it would work. And the wrapper that I'm planning could be worn with just nothing, just unfitted, which would be great over a nightgown, first thing in the morning. Getting dressed and that sort of thing. I could wear it with an apron for work. I could wear it with a nice belt for a nicer dress, nice bonnet and that sort of thing. And that about wraps this up. That's basically my 1870s working class wardrobe. So it takes me from like hard labor all the way to like church and social gatherings. But now I have a nice list of projects to get to. And I think that having it all listed out would certainly help me because otherwise I might forget things. So having it listed out that way is it's gonna help me a lot keep track of what I need to get done. So I made myself a nice little spreadsheet. At the bottom I have different time frames. They're all empty, like I haven't done anything with them yet. But I did put everything into the 1870 to 1876 part. And so yes, I like to color code everything. Y'all haven't even seen my daily to-do list chart or my video filming chart yet, or even my event checklist. Those things are extremely detailed and color coded. This one's kind of basic. So it's green for things that are good to go, yellow for things that are made up and in need of refitting or mending, and then red is for articles that I need to make. And I have it listed out by style. I have it listed out by garment, kind of like how we talked about underpinnings, and then we talked about dresses, and we talked about outerwear. All that's kind of listed, so I know exactly what I have. And that about wraps it up today on 1874 capsule wardrobes. And again, this could easily take me from 1870 to 1876. I just picked 1874 as being kind of in the middle of that range. If you do 1870s regularly and you have any suggestions on what I should add to my little list, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. Or if you do 1870s and you have your own capsule wardrobe and you want to tell us what you own, I'd love to hear that too. If anything else, tell me what you found most interesting or most surprising about what we talked about today. And also let me know if you'd like me to make this whole historic capsule wardrobe like a series on the channel, because we could do it for the different time periods that I do. I'd actually be really happy to oblige because it really helps me streamline all my projects and what I need. And also allows me to do a little bit more research and educate y'all on wardrobes of the time period. And with that being said, thank you so much for joining me today as we talked about 1874 capsule wardrobes. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And if you really like the content I put out, consider joining the channel and to support me and get a few extra perks. As always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next one.